Missile intercepts lighting up the sky over Lebanon, hijacked cargo ships on fire in the Red Sea, a massive, escalating humanitarian disaster in Gaza. Looking at the headlines, the Middle East appears defined by ancient, uncontrollable violence. These conflicts are the outputs of a highly engineered modern system, a series of geopolitical choices made by outside powers to prioritize their own influence over local stability. As World War I ended, British and French empires carved up the remaining Ottoman territories. Look at this map from 1916. They created arbitrary borders along cold, geometric lines to secure oil. These lines forced rival populations into artificial countries, turning citizens into pawns. This established the proxy playbook. To control the region, a superpower doesn't need to conquer it. They just have to arm a local faction to do the fighting for them. In 1979, the Islamic Revolution in Iran replaced a US-backed dictator with a religious government that was fiercely anti-American. Washington suddenly needed a way to contain this new revolutionary threat. They found their answer in Iraq's leader, Saddam Hussein. Throughout the 80s, the US provided Saddam with funding, intelligence, and even the supplies needed for his weapons programs. They deliberately ignored his use of illegal nerve gas against Iranians because at the time, he was a useful weapon. But of course, proxies eventually stopped taking orders. After 8 years of war, a heavily armed and desperate Saddam invaded his neighbor Kuwait to seize their oil wealth, turning him from a vital ally into a regional threat. Decades later, the US invaded Iraq to remove their former proxy. As leaked documents like the Downing Street memo prove, the Bush administration fixed the intelligence around a pre-made decision to invade, inventing stories of weapons of mass destruction to sell the war to the public. This is the first rule of the playbook. A proxy is only an asset as long as they follow the script. The moment they go rogue, they become the target. Stateless populations are even more vulnerable to this game. The Kurds have spent a century spread across 4 different countries, fighting for an independent land of their own. The United States has repeatedly used Kurdish militias as disposable ground troops. They were a primary force in the 2003 invasion of Iraq, and years later, the US armed them to lead the ground war against ISIS in Syria. But the moment ISIS was defeated, the US military withdrew. They stepped aside, allowing Turkey, a NATO ally, to launch airstrikes against the exact same Kurdish fighters who had just finished winning the war on the ground. Geopolitical loyalty is a one-way street. In the proxy playbook, ground forces are discarded the moment their immediate strategic utility expires. Regional governments employ these same tactics on their own neighbors. For nearly 2 decades, Benjamin Netanyahu pursued a specific strategy to ensure a Palestinian state could never exist. According to leaked internal communications, the strategy was simple. Israel would covertly allow the extremist group Hamas to maintain power in Gaza. They approved suitcases of untraceable cash to flow into the Strip, keeping Hamas funded and functional as a governing body. Propping up Hamas isolated Gaza from the more moderate Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. This created a permanent political fracture, ensuring there was no unified leadership for the international community to negotiate with. By trading an extremist group as a useful tool to manage a population, Netanyahu traded long-term security for short-term political leverage. This strategy created a radicalized, heavily armed enclave on the border, an architecture of containment that finally collapsed in the massacre of October 7th. Geopolitics has a predictable consequence for this behavior: blowback. Treating human beings as disposable weapons never buys lasting security. When the US military footprint expanded into Saudi Arabia to secure oil, it radicalized a young construction heir named Osama bin Laden. That local anger grew into al-Qaeda, eventually bringing the violence of the Middle East directly to American soil. When the US military pulled down Saddam Hussein's statue, they didn't build a democracy. They destroyed the existing power structure and created a massive, chaotic vacuum in the center of the region. Iran immediately filled that void. They spent billions funding their own revolutionary proxies, like Hezbollah in Lebanon, to wage a permanent war of attrition against the West and its allies. Current events in the Middle East are the residue of a century of calculated leverage. As long as powers treat this region as a chessboard, trading local blood for short-term influence, the cycle of blowback will remain permanent. True security cannot be built on disposable pawns.